in the end, we need a world in which we produce zero carbon dioxide. And zero means not a little bit, it means zero. And zero means also nuclear has to go at a certain point and has to be instead being provided the energy by renewable energies. And I think that it would be interesting for the space community to look into how can we help solve these problems.
Hey SpaceWatchers, this is Space Café Radio, your channel about trends, great people and awesome events. You may have listened to our Space Café Radios we recorded in Oslo during GLOC, the Global Space Conference on Climate Change in May 2023. Today I will talk with Niklas Nienass about the challenges in climate change and the rising role of space in that sector. I also will talk with him about the sustainable use of space and about the European initiatives we see at the moment. That is quite a bouquet of topics. Niklas Nienass is a German politician in his early 30s of the Alliance 90, the Greens, who has been serving as a member of the European Parliament since 2019. His focus area of work are the European regional politics and space policy. I'm Thorsten Kriening, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. Enjoy our conversation. Niklas, it was great to meet you in Oslo last month during GLOC, the Global Space Conference on Climate Change. How did you experience this new form of conference, at least for us new in the space sector?
Yeah, well, I found it quite interesting, to be quite honest. But I thought it was a good idea to come together in a little bit smaller circle and discuss a very precise topic instead of everything at the same time. So if you look at alternatives, there, of course, it's a big event, long days, great atmosphere and everything, but at the same time, you're talking about everything. And so here to put a focus, I think it was quite a good idea, and we'll see how this format evolves.
Only 6 politicians out of 200 invited showed up at GLOC. And as Greta Thunberg calls this the blah blah, plus claims and TV pitches never supported by real political challenges. Why climate change is not yet on your radar?
You know, especially for me being in the Greens, it's very high on the radar. At the same time, I think that it's not a thing of climate change not being a relevant topic for politics at the moment, quite the opposite, to be honest. But I think the combination between climate change and space is the novelty here, to really focus on this substance, even though space, of course, as we all know, has distributed so much for the understanding of climate change and is so of utmost importance to defeat climate change. But to really bring this together and think a little bit more and give it some more weight, I think is something new. It is the first time that the GLOC has happened, especially now and in the first time for the climate change discussion. But so this might be the reason why a lot of people were skeptical, didn't know it's not established yet, and all of this. There's a lot of reasons maybe for this, for the low turnout. But still, I think that the topics itself gain more and more traction in politics.
And you have been there. I mean, you showed up. That was very good. But let's talk concrete. How does your party, the Green Party, tune these Greta's claim blah, blah, blah into actions? On which fronts are you involved to actually stop fossil fuel consumption and green energy transition?
Well, I would say that we really try to hammer down all different fields and that we do not spare any field of policy from it. Of course, not all politicians do all stuff at the same time. We all have different expertise, but we're currently fighting at the transportation situation to reduce carbon emissions here, especially for ground infrastructure. There was a big fuss about the end of the combustion engine. There was decided just, last 2 or 3 months ago and had to be re-evaluated. We just did the finishing vote today in the committee. We have discussed about the future of aviation fuels in order to ensure that there's reduction of CO2 emissions in the aviation industry so that they use hydrogen for fueling. But then we also look at industry production, where we're looking at the moment at the net zero industries to make sure that we have the capabilities to build up all these energy production, but also industry production in a climate efficient way. And we also do not spare the discussion to talk about, for example, food production, because agriculture still contributes a huge lot to climate change, especially to the usage of synthetic fertilizer that is produced using hydrogen, and that hydrogen is not being produced by clean energy, but instead is produced by splitting up methane gas. And so as such is very highly potent and very highly CO2 enriched. And this is our food production that we also need to tackle, something that von der Leyen and the Green Deal always avoided, and that is always being avoided by a lot of people because they don't want to have the discussion. And so we are really trying to hammer it down on various fronts. In Germany, a big discussion about heating in your home and all of this. So I think there's a lot of change going on at the moment, and we need also to focus on the question of space. That's why I introduced, for example, the sustainability criteria that included sustainable space, meaning space debris reduction, light pollution reduction, but also at the same time reduction of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, for example, at the launching, but also at the production sites.
We will tackle that in a bit more detail, but give me the chance, having you here in this interview, to explain me something. What is your view about the EU plans to zero net carbon? It was last year that for many of us, it was quite shocking news that the EU decided to include carbon into the list of green energies. How do you see that? That can't be in your green genes.
No, I think it's great that we have the Green Deal. It's going in a good direction. But just going in the right direction doesn't mean that you definitely achieve your goals, right? If you're going hiking and you're going fairly up the mountain, you reach it somewhere and somewhen, but we need to reach the summit until the sun sets. And so therefore we need to act quicker and we need to take the right path. And this is something that we're missing at the moment. The direction is correct, but a lot of problems occur when it comes to the details. I mentioned agriculture, which has been completely neglected of this whole discussion. Therefore, you have a huge chunk of carbon emissions still being contributed. Then you talked about the taxonomy regulation, in which not just natural gas, but also nuclear power has been included for a political deal that in the end doesn't benefit at all either the climate nor the environment. And let me come at this point to nuclear. Why I'm so critical of this is even nuclear still produces CO2. Yes, far less than coal and gas, but in the end, we need a world in which we produce zero carbon dioxide. And zero means not a little bit, it means zero. And zero means also nuclear has to go at a certain point and has to be instead being provided the energy by renewable energies. And I think that it would be interesting for the space community to look into how can we help solve these problems, because so far space has been very important in solving and understanding the climate catastrophe. But we could use it also for the purpose to ensure how do we solve problems that we have at the moment. Very practical, talking, for example, about energy production. And there are ideas like the ESA is looking into at the moment to check out whether it's possible to make energy production in orbit and transfer the energy down to Earth. And this would be a very interesting net zero carbon energy production, in which space really plays a major role.
Let's talk more concrete about space and climate. From the political point of view, where do you see the potential of space into the fight against climate change? You mentioned Solaris as one study at the moment, but how you would like to see your sector and our sector interact?
I would say they're both my sector because I'm trying to already think them together. But again, I think there are three angles to this. One of them is to make sure that citizens, politicians, researchers know this already, but that everybody knows that space is non-discussable when it comes to climate change, to the fight against climate change. Why? Without the data from space, without Earth observation, but also without the possibilities that we get through positioning, through other services, there will be no chance for us to win against climate change. No way. If we don't understand our enemy, climate change here, if we don't understand what is going on, how the poles are melting, how glaciers are melting, how water is flowing, how air is undergoing, how jet streams are changing, if we don't understand this, by monitoring it, we will have no chance in winning against climate change. And that's why it's so important to defend our space infrastructure from threats such as space debris. That's why it's so important to have sustainability in space. This is the first pillar, making sure the society knows of the immense value that space brings in the fight against climate change, and that they draw the right conclusion, which is protect this with all means necessary. Second part is the question of how much do we as the space community, or how much do space endeavors themselves contribute to the increasement of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and trying to reduce it. I think this is a topic for every sector in any way, and so space shouldn't spare the discussion. I always said space, if you look at absolute numbers, it is quite low how it contributes, just because we have so few rocket starts in comparison, for example, to aviation. But of course, if there is a future for space, and it's a growing future, it means it has to be a future that is carbon neutral, meaning that we need to look especially at possibilities to launch without producing carbon dioxide. Especially hydrogen is interesting here, also maybe other possibilities. And space has the problem that, of course, if it emits greenhouse gases, it emits them also in very high altitudes, which is highly potent and highly problematic. And we need to tackle this and question ourselves, how can production be carbon neutral? And the third part then is, as I mentioned, what can we help to deliver to solve the problem that we have with climate crisis? How can we help deliver to win the fight against the climate crisis? Not just understanding, but now solving the issues as well. One of them, as I mentioned, Solaris is a possibility. Others are also looking in the same direction, energy production in space. There's other ideas of what to use in space, but we also have to then at the same time question ourselves, is it then so useful that in this discussion, while we're not using carbon-free launches, a lot of tourists are going up there just to have a nice view for a few days, looking at the planet that they're destroying at the moment, to be quite frank. I think for research and for all of these very important topics, which is 99.9% of all endeavors that we do in space, it's very justified to also say, we invest some carbon here in order to get more resources there, in order to get more understanding, to better and help our fight against climate change. But to just make it for a jolly old ride into the space, to have 2 days of looking at the blue marble, I think is overrated.
Niklas, you're touching an interesting point here. We had the discussion over the last years to engage and excite more and more people into the space sector. So students could build their CubeSats and launch them for a reasonable price. Companies started their constellations. So where is the balance on that? So what we should do and what we could do. Technically, we could do everything at the moment. And especially with the Starships and alike, of getting 100 tons equipment up there in one shot will enable, and that's what the forecast said, entire different space commerce ecosystem than we see now. But isn't it more wise to balance it for the valuable projects, valuable in terms of humanity rather than total commerce?
I think they go along with each other, because only if we enable more people to use space possibilities, I would say, so have cheap launches, have cheap satellites, etc. Only if we allow more people to weigh in and join the space community, then we will have more development there and more rapid development that could bring even better results. But we need to balance this, because at the same time we produce a lot of carbon dioxide, and we need to question that. And I think as soon as our launches are all using only hydrogen and are not increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, then why not, right? Then let the people go up there for a touristic trip if they're ready to pay and have a good time there. I have my doubts if that's a feasible economic model, but that's not my question to ask, right? I have to see whether this is hurting our community, our society, and if so, then I will put their boundaries. But if it's no problem, if you're not producing greenhouse gas emissions and if everything is respected, go for it. The economic risk is at your hand. I think there the bigger problem becomes actually the question of natural limits when it comes to space debris. I think this is bigger threat here because, the neutralization of carbon dioxide in space launches is possible to solve and has to be solved anyway. At the moment, yes, it's cheaper a lot of times to use fossil fuels to produce launches that rely on fossil fuels. But in the future, and I'm not talking about the next 5 years, but if we're looking with the horizon to 2030, to 2045, to 2050, especially from Europe, there will be no carbon dioxide production. So therefore, if you want to launch, it has to be probably hydrogen. If you find anything else better, go for it. But it has to be without fossil fuels. So to already start thinking about it now will give you the advantage in the future, because in the future, everybody will fly carbon-free.
I know that you and your team are pushing a project for life cycle assessment for space missions forward. Can you give us an update on that status, and why is that important?
We requested a pilot project in the Parliament to check out the life cycle assessment. I think it's important to figure out whether the investments make sense, what happens afterwards, to make sure that we respect boundaries, natural boundaries, societal boundaries, that we also figure out what's going on and that we learn something from it. And so we have requested a pilot project together with others, proposed it to the Committee for Industry, and have requested around 2 million to be implemented over the next 2 years in this request. So it's always for 2 years. After that, we can, if it's successful, we can prolong it for an additional 2 years. And if that's also successful, then it will become actually a part of the European program. So maybe then of the space program as a side program. I think that would be quite helpful. So this request was rated A, which is the best rating that you could get. So we will pretty much see it happening in the future. And the situation that we have no industry standards, what is exactly allowed with regards to the spacecraft production. But if we want to establish such standard, which has a lot of benefits for not just for European economy, but also for environment, etc., then we need the data on how the impact of the environment has and what the impact is there. In order to have this reliable information, that's why we have to put forward this proposal. Also, what they do in the atmosphere once they burn up, what is the result of that? And only if we have all of this information, which we currently have little of, we know that aluminium, when it burns up, is toxic for organisms. So this is a problem, of course, because aluminium is quite the useful resource in space and satellite building. But we need to figure out what is doing what harm, what is influencing how much, and what are the levels of threat that we occur. And I'm really thankful that I got a lot of support from colleagues for this, and even from the Commission to support it, that we will do this for the next 2 years. It's not complete final, so we have to agree on the budget committee in September on it, but I'm pretty certain they will come through because we got a lot of support.
Let me come to a final topic, and here you have been also be seen over the last years on the forefront, and that's the first European space law. In January, Commissioner Breton announced during the EU Space Conference that the European space law is now in the making. So can you give us an update on that, and why is that needed, as space is national law, actually?
Where shall I start? So first of all, for the question what is currently going on, we have asked the Commission to deliver on 2 additional parts. We call this a delegated act, in which we asked the Commission to propose as a new form of text or clarify certain circumstances. One of them was STM, in which we asked the Commission to do something about STM to make sure that we have more understanding, more rules, more clarity here. And the other part is
space traffic management.
Space traffic management. And the other one is included into the IRIS constellation proposal, which we did in March, or finalized March, in which we included an amendment from me saying the 4 criteria for sustainable space: light pollution, space debris removal, greenhouse gas emissions, and also critical raw materials being used for the production, etc. But we only wrote basically these 4 sentences. And so the question is, what does it in detail mean? And the Commission is working on this. So the Commission has the proposal to do these 2, to deliver on these 2 things anyway. And I'm just speculating a little bit, but as I understood it, was they got this on the table, and the Parliament wants us to do it anyway. Let's do it all in one and make it a space law and call it the European Space Law. What I don't know at the moment is whether they only focus on these 2 parts, or whether they say, you know what, this is the start, and this was my strategy from the get-go, to give them so much work to do in this regard that they say, you know what, we'll do it one comprehensive space law, and then we're done for all times, which I'm really hoping for, that they're going. And I know that certain people in the Commission also want to do that, but other people in other parts of the Commission, also in the Council, are still hesitant whether they're allowed to do it. And here we come to your question, because officially it's national member states' deal. From the Outer Space Treaty, it states that member states can do it, so the national member states, and not the European Union. But of course, the European Union could do it if the member states agree. In the treaty, it says that we have space and exploration as a field in which the Union supports the member states and coordinates, but doesn't have legislative power. But these treaties are 20 years old, and in the past 20 years, a lot of things have changed, especially in space. And my major argument is that the major change that we saw in space is that it has become more and more from this statehood-owned research facility towards more commercialization. We see this especially in the US, we see it also in Europe, and we know that this trend will continue and grow. So we are now not anymore in a field of research, but we are in a field of the common European market. And for the common European market, it's quite clear the treaty says the European Union has to regulate everything that comes in close with the common European market. And here is the dilemma. Do you follow what is exactly written in the treaty, or do you adapt to the reality that we live in right now? The thing is, if nobody complains, then there's no problem. And I'm trying to convince all the member states that it is in their best own interest to have a European space law. And the reasons for that are quite simple. First of all, it is completely absurd to think that in future, if you want to launch something, if you have a project in space and a private project, that you will buy everything that you need for this, if you're located in Europe, from just companies of one state. So launchers, satellite builders, in-orbit operators, all of this launch site, all of this from one European state, impossible. It's just simply impossible. So you will have to work across borders anyway. What happens is that if you work across borders and everybody has different legislations, it's crazy amount of bureaucracy and impossible to do. They did try it. They had a launch Virgin Galactic project. In that were 3 satellites, one from Poland, one from Spain, and one, I believe, from Sweden. EU member states, they had complete different forms to fill out together with a UK authority for the launch site and an American company. They all went crazy because of the forms, because of taxes, because of liability questions. It was so difficult to understand that it made it really hard, and you really had to be enthusiastic about this to make it happen. In the end, the start failed, but it's a different story. So we want to ease that burden and make it so much easier for companies to work together across borders, to make it much easier for everybody in Europe to have a business. Ideally, bringing this also to Norway, to Switzerland, to the UK, who are included in the ESA, but not in the EU. But I think we can cooperate here in a lot of ways. And so that we have a common framework under which we rule. And this is basically the space law. Also solving questions like liabilities, like sustainability criteria, all of this included. And the other part, and the other big reason is in the end, we need an international law, right? If we want to tackle space debris, if we want to tackle the question of frequencies, if we want to tackle the question of how to use space in the benefit of all mankind and of all nations that is stated in the Outer Space Treaty, then we need to do it internationally. Doing something at the moment is highly problematic because of the situation with Russia and Ukraine. But also in general, since the past, 40 years, we haven't seen major improvements like new treaties or something like this. So my argument here is if we have a space treaty for the EU, that might even include UK, Norway, Switzerland, which is an agreement from very big member states like France and Germany towards medium member states like Czech Republic, even to the smallest like Malta and Cyprus. If we can find an agreement for all of this, I think this is a compromise that could work on the international level. And this would be something to go around and see, this is a basis of discussion. Let's come around, sit here and figure out how we can do it for an international cooperation. And this would be a big step where Europe could set a very positive example. European companies have a huge advancement because they're already one step ahead of everybody else. But also we could finally show on the world stage again that Europe is capable of negotiation worldwide treaties and is a relevant player in the world, especially for space.
I really liked what I heard, Niklas. Thank you very much. So what is the way forward now on all what's on your agenda?
Currently, it's very interesting. We're running around talking behind the scenes with commission, with experts, a little bit on this level, quite honestly, because I think it doesn't make sense at the moment to yell at each other across media outlets, because this isn't bringing us to the goal. I think that a lot of people, especially in the Commission, have great ideas, are looking in a good direction, and we want to support them, that their ideas bear fruits, that the power, the courage is there to propose to the Council something that is not in the work program of the Commission, that was not agreed in the way forward in the agreement of the Council, of the European Council, of the heads of state. but still proposing something that is valuable, brings additional value to Europe, to its stance in the world, to its economy, and its place as research standpoint. And I think that it's not easy doing this political fight, especially if you're in the commission. You have to follow these orders, have to follow there, it's not an easy task for them as well. But we really want to encourage them, figure out what the details are at the moment. I know they're working on the concretization of the sustainability criteria, what I'm really looking forward to. Especially, I want to look into the question of dark skies, this initiative where we reduce light pollution. And all of these are matters that we're doing at the moment in the background. I think around a year ago, I made a big fuss about in the publicity department, basically trying to wake everybody up and go forward with the space law. I think we've got a good step ahead, got very good feedback from a lot of people from the community. So shout out to everybody out there for your support in this regard. And now we're doing the work behind the scenes, behind the curtains, and hopefully, really hopefully, we'll have a proposal from the Commission that is very comprehensive in fall or winter this year still. And then even more, hopefully, I get the honor to work on this file for the Parliament. In any case, I'll be working on it. The question is just in which position, but I'm really hoping to shape this in the future. And if it's not comprehensive, then we'll make it comprehensive in the Parliament, in the legislative train.
Thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week then.
Yes, likewise. Oh, and very happy that we're at the moment, and this is also a thing that we're doing, of course, is the exhibition concerning space debris, concerning all of these threats to our infrastructure that we have in the middle of the European Parliament. And the reason behind that is I'm always a little bit critical of these exhibitions because regular citizens have it hard to come there because you need to get an invite to the Parliament, show your badge and everything. But the focus here is really showing other MEPs, showing other people from the Commission what the threats are for our infrastructure. And therefore, we have this big exhibition in the European Parliament. I'm really happy about it. I'm looking very much forward.
Same here. We had end of last year, we had a podcast with Max Alexander on that, but I never have seen it. So I'm looking forward to see the exhibition now in reality. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, me too. I also haven't seen it yet. I have to be honest.
Okay.
We only talked to Max Alexander, but haven't seen the things. Oh, and we got some exhibition parts also from ESA. So a little bit of aluminium to just show what plastic makes to aluminium, what the threat really is to make it understandable. And I hope to really change the view of a lot of colleagues. We did that when Samantha Cristoforetti was in plenary. Finally, people were listening to an astronaut talking about her ambitions for Europe, and they were engaged. They were just like, wow, Europe is so cool. We're so proud of Europe right now. We want to support our space endeavors. And this is something that we need to continue.
Absolutely. Let's build on that momentum.
Great.
Take care. Bye. If you have further questions, reach out to us at radio@SpaceWatch.Global. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Thorsten Kriening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.